exporting inflation, anchoring poverty. Currency and the untold realities of global life amidst the rapid currents of innovation driving the global economy. Today's world is not divided by borders of the diligent versus the idle. Instead, it is split between nations capable of exporting shocks and those destined to be the shock absorbers. In this intricate global financial system, the US dollar serves as the primary conveyor belt, inextricably linking immense wealth with profound hardship. Engel's law is an economic theory stating that as household income increases, the percentage of income spent on food declines, even if the absolute expenditure on food rises. This law is a critical barometer of wealth. Impoverished households must dedicate nearly all their earnings to survival, food, leaving nothing for education, innovation, or wealth accumulation. Structural divide, unified rules. Consider the life of Alex, a tech professional in New York with a median household income of roughly $75,000 per year. According to Engel's law, Alex spends only about 10% of his income on food. As income rises, the proportion spent on sustenance decreases, leaving him with vast purchasing power to enjoy global innovations at his fingertips. In contrast, Uncle Sam, a farmer in a developing nation, experiences the cruelest side of Engel's law. Data from the FAO and the World Bank indicate that small-scale farmers in the developing world shoulder food and production costs amounting to 60 to 70% of their income. This disparity is not a matter of intellect or work ethic. It is the result of a predetermined purchasing power structure where one group sells intellectual capital, while the other is forced to sell risk, harvested from sweat and unpredictable weather. The structural advantage of a superpower like the US is no accident. It is the fruit of centuries of intellectual accumulation and the forging of global trade laws. The US invests roughly 3.5% of its GDP into R&D, allowing them to create the indispensable, the dollar-based financial system. Swift data shows the dollar is used in 47% of international payments, and the IMF reports it constitutes over 58% of global foreign exchange reserves. This exorbitant privilege grants the superpower the authority to dictate economic trends that reverberate across the globe. Currency magic, the invisible export of impact. When a superpower faces an economic crisis and deploys monetary policies like quantitative easing, QE, the excess dollars flood global commodity markets for speculation and wealth preservation. This drives up the prices of oil and natural gas. Since natural gas is a primary raw material for chemical fertilizers, agricultural production costs spike immediately. This is the phenomenon of exporting inflation. When the superpower reverses course to combat inflation by raising interest rates, capital flows back to the center instantly, causing the dollar to strengthen, dollar hegemony, while developing currencies plummet. Uncle Sam, at the end of this conveyor belt, finds that the same bag of fertilizer has become prohibitively expensive simply because his local currency has weakened against the greenback. The superpower successfully exports the side effects of its domestic policy. The poor nation, however, cannot export its poverty back. Lessons from global pain. When the dollar stirs, the world shakes. This is not mere theory. It is a living tragedy playing out in various roles worldwide. Sri Lanka, the breaking point shock, a case of sudden fracture. In 2022, as dollar reserves withered and the currency collapsed, the nation could no longer import fuel or fertilizer. Agricultural output plummeted by half, and food prices surged over 90%, leading to nationwide riots. It proved that when the dollar belt stopped spinning, nations dependent on imported inputs face immediate social collapse. Nigeria, resource-rich, currency-poor despite being an African oil giant, Nigeria is trapped in a dollar snare. As the naira weakened sharply following global interest rate hikes, all imported goods became astronomically expensive. Inflation hit a 3-decade high. Citizens of an energy-rich nation now face starvation because their currency lacks the power to buy innovation or even bread from the global market. Argentina, chronic dollar trapped the face of chronic suffering. Trapped in a cycle of dollar-denominated debt and 200% inflation, citizens live in a state where their money loses value by the second. The dollar has become a deity everyone must hold for survival, yet this desperation further destroys the peso's stability. It confirms that inflation crosses borders much faster than trade relief. Locked rules, systemic confinement. What the world seldom discusses is that developing nations do not lack capability or perseverance. They are locked in by invisible rules. From technology licensing fees paid to the global north, to shifting trade barriers disguised as standards, and a rigid IP regime that stifles developmental mimicry, these rules tether developing nations to the bottom of the value chain. They remain contract manufacturers of raw materials, trapped in a price war with no winners. The double-edged sword of weak currency. In economics, a weak currency is often touted as an export opportunity. However, these benefits are caught in a bottleneck, with profits clustering among large conglomerates. Statistics show small farmers receive only a fraction of the final retail price. Furthermore, neighboring nations producing similar goods, like Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia, end up competing by suppressing prices, a race to the bottom, where increased production leads to diminishing real value. The trap why prices cannot rise with costs. The heart of this hardship lies in the fact that farmers in developing nations cannot immediately adjust status as price takers. Agricultural commodities lack differentiation. If one country raises its prices, buyers will instantaneously shift their demand to another global source. State policies. Governments frequently suppress agricultural prices to stabilize the urban cost of living and maintain food security, effectively subsidizing the city at the expense of the farm. The debt cycle and perishability. The urgent need for liquidity to service mounting debts, combined with a lack of storage infrastructure, strips farmers of any bargaining power to withhold their produce for a better price. Geo-arbitrage, the spatial lens of inequality. The mechanism best explaining this failure is geo-arbitrage. In this context, it isn't just about the wealthy moving to low-cost areas. It is the asymmetry of geographic choice. Capital and the elite perform geo-arbitrage freely, choosing low-wage manufacturing hubs, using hard currency accounting, and stashing profits in tax havens. Capital moves to wherever geography yields the highest return. Conversely, the laboring poor like Uncle Sam are anchored by physics and law. They are bound by visas, language, work permits, and family obligations. While inflation and living costs cross borders via the dollar in milliseconds, labor cannot follow the currency to areas of higher purchasing power. This is one-sided geo-arbitrage, acting as a spatial anchor of inequality. The world is open for money, but closed for people. Daily life dimensions, microshocks, and the genetic trap of poverty that even the urbanites can outrun. The pain does not end at the rice fields. It bleeds into the household baskets of urban dwellers. When global fertilizer and oil prices surge, they manifest as the rising cost of rice, eggs, and cooking oil in fresh markets, as well as escalating utility bills. While the rural population suffers through production costs, the urbanites bleed through a cost of living that devours daily wages until nothing is left to save. The burgeoning debt, therefore, is not born of extravagance, but of survival. Even more chilling is the dimension of time. Poverty is inherited across generations like a genetic trait. The children of farmers, deprived of educational capital, are forced into the informal labor sector, a world devoid of social safety nets. Inflation erodes purchasing power in a year, but poverty devours opportunity for a lifetime. The polished GDP statistics are merely an optical illusion used by the world to mask the lives of those who are silently drifting into ruin, opening the door to questions the world must answer. When income fails to reach the small players, governments often resort to populism, a painkiller that ignores the underlying disease. Borrowing to sustain life amidst high global interest rates pushes household debt to staggering levels. The world is designed for rule makers and rule followers. Superpowers act out of domestic necessity, but the resulting impact is a financial tsunami that hits the defenseless. Yet, within this dark cycle, there are alternatives we must question. the creation of regional currencies to de-dollarize, a focus on food sovereignty to reduce input dependence, or establishing a strategic fertilizer reserve to counter commodity market volatility. The final question is not just who is to blame, but if the world is designed for money and wealth to travel faster than human quality of life, should we simply race faster under the reign of the dollar? Or is it time to ask which global rules must change so that poverty stops being the only export developing nations are forced to carry forever?